Welcome to CMake and Qt Widgets and more. In this final but one episode in the series on how to develop plugins for Qt Designer, we're going to turn our attention mostly to CMake to see how we get the files copied into the right places. Okay, I admit, this is going to be a very short episode, but the return of investment, the time you gain or save divided by the time you spent in this episode is going to be hopefully pretty good for you. See, there is a few learnings in this. It's not rocket science, but if you don't think of it, it might actually cause you rather a lot of headache. So, shall we get started? Okay, we'll start out with the CMake file. Actually, we'll start out down in the corner here. I hope that you stayed long enough in the last episode to hear that you must compile the plugin in the same configuration, at least on Windows. I'm not entirely sure on Linux, but at least on Windows, in the same configuration as you compiled Qt Creator. And if you didn't compile Qt Creator, but you just used the SDK, and you didn't compile Qt Designer, just use the SDK, then that means release. You likely do not want to compile your application during your development cycles in release mode. So for that reason, it is a good idea to actually go up here and set up multiple different builds so that you can build both in debug and in release with debug information. And then, of course, if you deploy it to customers, you might want to do it only in release mode. But for your plugins, those I guess you don't deploy to customers. Well, it depends. For your plugins, you want them to be in release with debug information so that when they crash, you have some debug information. Because here is the first learning of all of this. The designer plugins are loaded into the same memory space, into the same processing space as your Qt Creator. Which means that if you are developing your application in Qt Creator and you're using the plugins that you created here, you can actually get into the situation where your plugin crashes and therefore takes down all of Qt Creator. And I guess you do not want to start the whole Qt Creator debugging that, so at least having debugging symbols on it is worthwhile. Okay, having said all of that, let's look at the CMake file here. So the CMake file consists of a number of things that we've seen in the previous episode. So if you just jump in here, better go and watch those episodes. The thing that changed is down here in the plugin specific part, because you do not want to compile the plugins when you are in debug mode, because they are incompatible to Qt Creator. Therefore, this whole setup sets up an option here for QAM, Qt Widget and more, build plugins that is simply a toggle. And we can see that if I go over to my projects here and I find QAM, then you can see there's on and off here. You might want to turn it off or on by default. I guess a better default is off so that people recognize, hey, no plugin can come out of this, and oh yeah, rather than why do Designer not load my plugins every second time? And that was because I actually accidentally compiled the debug version and put on top of the files. So maybe you want off here. Next thing, you want, as we learned in the previous episode, to copy the plugin into both the Designer plugin directory and into Qt Creator's Designer plugin directory. And yes, this is interesting times because this directory for the Qt Creator plugin is in different subdirectories. So we have an option for that too. And the default here, I try to figure that out depending on that. So that's my option here for QAMDir for Creator Designer plugin. And I also had the QAMDir for Designer plugin, and that is in Qt Installation Plugin Designer. That part was fortunately easy. And finally, the binary where Qt Designer and Qt Creator is located, that's where I want my libraries to go next to, and that's the QAMDir for plugin dependencies. There's actually one thing that we didn't see up here. If I just scroll up again, if I can find it, come on. I cannot find it. That's marvelous. There it is. It's the very first line in this, the plugin specific stuff. And see, I set up a CMake subdirectory of my current work directory, and from there I install the Qt, or I ask for the Qt install path. You would want to copy that file over into your stuff. It's a file created from Alan Winter from KDAP, and it basically creates, it calls QMake and queries that from a number of information, and then it creates these Qt install plugin. And look at the file itself. It's rather self-documenting. Okay, if I have all of these, and let's just go and see the configuration again here. So you can see we have the on-off here, and then the QAMDir for Creator, Designer, and all of these. And hopefully they will all be fine. And if you've compiled Creator yourself or Designer yourself or whatever, then you might want to specify them in different locations. With all of that, the last piece that we need is this part down here. If I want to build plugins at all, then I'll add the plugin directory. This is again from the previous episode. I want to do these 3 blocks here pretty much the same. What I say is that I create a new custom target called copy QAM plugin dependencies. And what this one does is that it simply run a copy command of whatever my QAM lib, so that's the library that I have, copy that to this directory for QAMDir for plugin dependencies. And it even prints out, unfortunately it doesn't for me in Windows, but on Linux it does print out copying Qt Designer plugin dependencies to this directory. It does the same thing for copying the QAM plugin onto the QAMDir for Designer plugin, and it copies the QAM plugins to QAMDir for Creator plugin. With that in place, all I need to do now is to compile my application I built, and you can see that it says running utility command for copy QAM plugin to Designer to Creator, and hopefully somewhere it also said, maybe, I don't know, why didn't it? We'll have to investigate. But anyway, now it copied things in place, and hopefully if I go to my UI file, you can see it's actually working up here. It's even so marvelous that Qt Designer realized that, hey, this plugin here, even if it was a promoted widget, now it's actually a plugin, and then it shows it as a plugin for me. I cannot stress it out enough. If your plugin crashes, it will take down Designer, which is mostly okay, but it will also take down Creator, which might be a rather nasty pain somewhere I'm not going to tell you about. So therefore, you really want to be careful with that code, of course, but also you want to be notified very loudly whenever your plugin code crashes. So therefore, what I did was that I created a message handler that I installed. Let me show that to you. The message handler is a global function, QAM message handler. And that's not my choice to make it a global function. That's just how message handlers in Qt work. So here you can see Q install message handler with this global function. It returns the original message handler, which I keep around. I'll show you why in a minute. But when are message handler called? Well, message handlers are called whenever a QDebug, QWarning, QFatal, or QCritical are being executed. And in that situation, what happens is that this code here is being executed. QDebug and QWarning, I don't care about those in this context, so I'll just go for the critical and the fatal. If they are called, then I will, or if a QCritical or QFatal calls, then I'll bring up a message box with the information. If QFatal or QCritical was executed in file, whatever file, line, whatever line, function, whatever function, and the message was. Likely line, function, and file will not be available because you are in release mode, but it's worth the try nevertheless. And if it's a faithful, then I'll abort so that I can get out of this in nice ways. I could actually do, as I do down here, call original handler with this stuff here, which likely will abort too. Okay, you've now seen everything that is needed to build and deploy plugins in Qt Creator for Qt Designer and in the Qt Designer standalone. Just remember, on Windows, you cannot deploy the plugin once you have loaded in a UI file in Designer or in Creator, simply because that they have loaded in the plugin and they do not unload it even if you remove or you go away from all of your UI files. There are no other way than quitting Qt Creator, loading it back in again, and making sure that you do not load up any UI file. Or you go to the command line and you can do like what I have right here. You can simply run cmake --build, and you can see here I actually managed to. But still my Creator needs to be down. That's it from this mini episode on Qt widgets and more on building your Designer plugins. There's one bonus episode that I'll put out next, and that is an episode on how do you actually find where or what goes wrong if your plugins doesn't load. I had an enormous amount of frustrating debugging time with that, and on Linux, I'll be using strace. On Windows, I'll be using a tool that I already forgot what it's called. But stay tuned for the next episode. Do leave your message in the area below. And as always, check out the area below for finding the Git repository with all the code that I've been showing you. I'm Jesper Petersen from KDAP. Thank you for watching.